Like remind yourself of how awesome your younger self would have felt just to, not you might not have done a comedy set on Conan, but the fact that you're even on stage. Remember when you used to cry when you had to perform on stage, so.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Storyverse, a space dedicated to sharing the journeys of a diverse universe of storytellers. I am beyond ecstatic that on today's show, we will be getting to know Tim Barnes. Is that how you say your name?
That is how you say it. It's not Tim Barnes or anything like that. Just Tim Barnes.
Like French or something.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Tim is a comedian, TV writer, and just all-around funny guy. He's known for his work on the Nickelodeon sitcom Warped and the reboot of All That. And that's not all. He's also on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. On top of that, he is the creator of the Comedy Central web series Maurice on Mars. Welcome to Storyverse, Tim.
Happy to be here. Happy to finally be here. This is very exciting.
You may not know the behind the scenes, but it's been a little crazy. Tim has learned all about the ins and outs of the podcast and what can go wrong.
And what will go wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I can't possibly kick this off without saying, may the 4th be with you.
Thank you. I also co-host a Star Wars focused podcast called Yub Nub. So the 4th, this is a very important day for me and my co-hosts. We're obsessed with Star Wars. And are you obsessed with Star Wars?
Yeah, so I actually I found out about this podcast like a couple of days ago, and I was like, how kismet, like how perfect is that we're doing this on May 4th? And I will say, like growing up, my dad and my brother, we would all like go to the Star Wars movies, and I was totally obsessed. I haven't like kept up with it quite as much, but I will still, it's like still like a nostalgic thing for me. But I think that's so cool that you have a whole podcast that to your love of Star Wars. Like how did that get started? But more importantly, I really want to know if you have like any vivid like memories or moments, stories growing up that like really got you wrapped up into the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, so the podcast started with every day. I think maybe because I would post online like Star Wars related jokes or like things about my nostalgia. And so back when I was a digital writer at Comedy Central, one of my coworkers, Jim Fagan, he would always be like, dude, we should do like something about Star Wars. We should start a podcast about Star Wars. And he would talk about how sad he was that like he'll probably die before he'll know the entire Star Wars story because the Star Wars story is so ongoing. It used to feel like there were ending points. It used to be like the Return of the Jedi was the last Star Wars movie for a long time. So everyone thought that they basically knew the whole story. But now none of us will live to hear the entire story. Yeah. And then I would, the same thing would happen with my friend Greg Iwinski, who's written for, I'm getting all of the late night hosts mixed up in my head. He used to write for Stephen Colbert and also John Oliver. And so when the pandemic hit, it felt like finally this like opportunity for us to have something creative to focus on every week to finally start a Star Wars themed podcast. So if you subscribe to it and you listen to some of those earlier episodes, you're really hearing three people figure out, what the tone of the show they're doing is, why they're doing it. And now that the world has kind of opened up a bit, we're getting a little bit more focused on it. And so the most recent one is a May the 4th special where we talked about our experience going to see Return of the Jedi in theaters last weekend. And I could easily turn this into a Star Wars podcast. So if you want to get this back on track, that's
the whole Star Wars podcast. No, but I do want to know a little bit more about like what your experience growing up with Star Wars was and kind of how that like influenced your love of storytelling and writing.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in South LA back when it was called South Central LA, and I wasn't allowed to go out around the block as a kid. And so I loved movies. Anytime my parents like, "You want to go do something?" I was like, "I want to go to the movies." And then the idea of George Lucas kind of became legendary in my mind because he went to USC, which was just blocks away from where I lived. And so as like the special editions came out, and then when the prequels came out, like right around the age of 10 for me, I was, picking up all those magazines that were Star Wars related. I remember like picking up a magazine for The Phantom Menace. Like this was my introduction for the Star Wars of my generation at the time when all those, they were selling those special Star Wars cups with like Jar Jar Binks heads and Qui-Gon Jinn heads at Pizza Hut and Subways and stuff. But I remember like getting one of those magazines that's just like pictures of all these new characters and stuff. And I remember I was this mystery of this new tattooed faced character named, in my mind, I'm just reading it. Darth Maul is how I pronounce it. You're asking how I pronounce my name. And so I remember going to my elementary school friends and being like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to learn more about this Darth Maul." And then my one friend, white friend, like, "You idiot. It's like Maul. It's like saying Paul with an M in front." So it was like, that was my friend group in elementary school was technically it was like podcasting before podcasting. We were obsessed with the Power Rangers and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that really followed me. I remember just like loving everything about the behind the scenes of Star Wars. Certain things that are funny now and objectively, I grew up loving the prequels and I slowly realized, okay, these aren't the perfect movies. These aren't the best movies in the world. Right. So now everything I do is about trying to get everything in the proper context. Like I used to watch the behind the scenes feature for The Phantom Menace like a religious text. And my idea of filmmaking was George Lucas in the early 2000s directing movies, which is not necessarily how filmmaking works. You're not always a guy wearing flannel in a company that you own, full of yes men, walking around with a cup of coffee, and everything's blue screens. That's not necessarily how it works. But so that's my love of Star Wars in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, he's definitely an enigma.
Yes, he's a mystery. I think about him all the time because it's like how, because first of all, he kind of like, there's so much to love about George Lucas because he is someone who felt wronged by the industry and then he took control over it. Like the fact that he, retains ownership of this. By the time Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were made, like he was self-producing them. He had all these toy rights and stuff like that. It's an interesting story just because, and I know that he's an actual human being, but once he becomes a myth in your head, there are so many variations of the story. It could be the story of an independent filmmaker who becomes his own Darth Vader. He becomes his own studio, the very thing he rebelled against, or the sort of reverse of that. So, yeah, George is always in my heart.
President always.
Yeah,
he shall live.
Now, I was always the one that wish I could fully accept the George into my heart.
Yeah.
I love the prequels. I love Star Wars when it entertains me. But the thing is, I grew up as a young black nerd.
Yeah.
So all my friends were really into Star Wars, but by the time I got to the prequels and stuff, I was around. I think I was around that age, around 10 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Yo, these are awesome," but my ADHD won't let me watch old movies past a certain age, certain movie age.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I look and I appreciate what he had to do to make that stuff, though.
Yeah,
like he did a lot on a. My mom used to say, "Don't shop for wine on a beer budget." He was shopping for wine on a beer budget.
Yeah, and he was so stressed out for that first Star Wars movie. He was so stressed out I think he had ulcers. He created Industrial Light and Magic to like make the special effects for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
He like it could have failed spectacularly. And in fact, the only other feature film. Oh, he made 2 feature films for Star Wars, but like his first attempt at a feature film, THX 1138, was a big flop. A very experimental sci-fi movie, but a big flop. And then he made American Graffiti, and then he goes and makes he just has the strangest career.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the fact that you think of him as the director of the original trilogy. He only directed the first one. Empire Strikes Back has a different director. Return of the Jedi has a different director. He was the co-writer for both of those. He was the producer for all of those. So I feel like I'm turning this into a Star Wars podcast, even though it isn't.
He's like, if you do not stop this,
I'm being converted live on recording.
Heard. Well,
yeah.
Speaking of universes, a pattern just with your work and especially with the creation of Maurice on Mars. Now, I was talking about this before we jumped on, but I first discovered you and your work via LinkedIn because I had seen, this trailer or something for Maurice on Mars. So I binged it. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was great. Really, especially because when I think of someone, I don't think people realize just what it takes to create something, let alone write it and then actually, star in it and get it out there in the world. Like that is an incredible feat on its own. And I thought it was really interesting how with Maurice, like he is so, he's kind of very interested in the world, and you talk about radical Earth theory. and he's just this regular dude.
Just a regular dude. Yeah.
He's trying to live a better life, and he's hoping the grass is greener on the other side. But he turns out it's not.
Yeah. I'm getting through this sort of phase of like trying to recontextualize like what the Maurice on Mars experience was for me. Because this is a web series, 3 episodes, about 5 minutes in length each episode. And when the episodes came out, I had forgotten how horrible the internet is to a certain degree. So on the YouTube comments level of things, they got very strange. A lot of people, it was hard to suss out like what was just racist in the comments, what was genuine critique. And I love genuine critique. And realizing that when you are a Black creator, sometimes that's the only thing that people don't see the artist. They see this is a Black person trying to like force some sort of Black commentary on me, which is very funny to me. Because like Maurice on Mars is not really hammering in that much. Like the radical Earth theory has kind of nothing to do with race at all. It's just this idea. So just to throw that out there, but the experience of making that was so exciting because that was really the first thing that I created on my own with my name on it as the writer, creator, voice of the main character. And so there's a lot of anxiety that comes with a project like that. It's just like a big graduation as a creative person, I think, when you create something on an official capacity like that, especially in animation, when you're collaborating with all these talented artists and sound designers and things like that. There's so many levels of work that build up to it. And so I'm really proud of it. And I love meeting other fans of it as well.
So would you say that was like your first Star Wars? That was like
It really was. And it's one of those things where for your first like big project, solo project like that, you kind of do pour some of your own anxieties into it. You pour a little bit more of like yourself into it than I think as my career will progress. Everything will have myself in it, but for those first projects, they're always strange in that way. Mm-hmm. And your attachment to it is a little strange in that way. But I definitely had Star Wars in mind in the sense that the original Star Wars that came out in 1977, it's an insane movie because you're starting in the middle of something. You're not seeing the start of a Star War. The Star War is already happening. You start up in the middle of of Darth Vader's ship trying to get some plans from Princess Leia's ship, and then you follow these droids onto. And so I really wanted Maurice on Mars to start in the middle of everything happening. So you're not necessarily following Maurice on his journey from Earth to Mars. He's already working at the coffee shop, and you're kind of playing catch up. And that's also tends to be my style comedically anyway, and stand up and things like that. Yeah, I like the idea of people catching up as the jokes are moving along. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you say that the series kind of intertwines with your real life? Like, is there any? What about Maurice is like, hey, that's kind of me.
Well, I think the thing about Maurice and the thing about me is that I never really think of myself as a main character. And I don't think Maurice he is the main character. The plots sort of end up centering around him, but he's not necessarily the most interesting character. And so that's not always the best way to write a character either. But that was really something that I wanted to experiment with, where it's not necessarily that Maurice starts each episode with a personal goal and you're following like the pitfalls of him trying to achieve it. It's more, he's just trying to get through his day, and all of these things keep happening to him. And I kind of considered him to be a little bit more of like a Charlie Brown or an Arnold from Hey Arnold type character.
Right. Yeah. No, he's definitely someone that I could relate to. Actually, I thought I could totally see you in him too.
And that was I had to kind of be convinced to even have me be the voice of him and to have the character kind of look like me. But I'm happy with the result ultimately.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's so cool that a place where like Comedy Central is ultimately where you end up, the series is hosted, distributed. And so I know that you got your, I don't want to say your start, because we all know everyone starts in comedy at least 10 to 15 years before they actually make it in there. But I know that like you started your writing journey, a lot of that started with Comedy Central. So it's like this circle moment that you kind of got to create a web series with them. So how did you kind of get there? Like you've been writing with Comedy Central and then eventually going on to, working on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Like what does that journey look like?
Yeah, it's hard to explain. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try to do this with the speed and efficiency that I just talked about George Lucas. So my career, it's like two paths that kind of converged. My dream was to be a filmmaker. And so my dream was, to go to film school, learn how to learn cinematography, learn, writing, all of it so that I could end up making movies. Eventually fell into doing stand-up. But those same behind the scenes sort of skills that I had of like editing and wanting to focus on like sound editing and stuff, that ended up being the stuff that I was doing to there was also a growth that led to that as well. But so how do I explain this? So I went to Santa Barbara City College after high school because they had a good film program. Dropped out after about 2 years because it was on that cusp of when you used to go to film school just for the access to the materials. And this was when like the materials like automatically come with your laptop and it's easier to learn all this stuff. And the real purpose of going to school in the arts, I feel, is networking and meeting peers and that kind of thing. So I kind of got that from those 2 years. And then I had like sort of a dark year when I moved back with my parents and was working at a movie theater. And but I also fell into just like going to open mics and stuff to do comedy. And so my good friend who I went to high school with we hatched this plan to save up some money, move to Chicago, do the whole second city thing. We go to Chicago. I take some sketch writing classes. I enjoy that, but I realize I care more about stand-up than I do improv. So I focused really hard on that. And I was working at my first job there was I was a host at a California pizza kitchen. Then I was working at a Dunkin' Donuts, which is directly tied to Maurice on Mars, working at a coffee shop. And what happened was I was going, I wanted to really become a part of the city. This was like still in the glow of the Obama era and everything that he did in Chicago. And so I was doing a lot of random volunteer stuff just to feel that. And also when you're volunteering, you tend to get free food at these events that you're volunteering at. So that was a plus. And so I was going to a lot of open mics, and then I started volunteering at WBEZ Chicago events. And this comedian, Brian Babylon, great comedian, he's a regular panelist on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. He would see me, and he hosted a morning radio show at this Vocalo, which is a sister station to WBEZ. So he would see me at all these WBEZ events in the background. And then he would see me at all these comedy shows and things in the background. And then one day he just walked up to me. He was like, dude, like, are you stalking me? Like, what the hell is going on here? I was like, no, I just I have an interest. Like, I want to learn what radio production is like. I had this sort of like weird dream in my head of becoming a This American Life producer and that kind of thing. Yeah. And I also do stand up. And so he's like, this is like one of the most important things that ever happened in my life. Was he got me this unpaid internship for his morning radio show. It wasn't paid, and I was still working at the Dunkin' Donuts. But this is my first official like entry into anything like officially media oriented, and so I was so excited about that. I quit working at Dunkin' Donuts, even though this was an unpaid internship, and that was another like odd, dark period of my life where it's like I'm not making like it was I don't know how I survived. Just kind of black out in those sort of starving, struggling artists with a dream. Yeah. But that ended up leading to me being having a paid internship as a podcast producer for WBZ and that kind of thing. So I kind of had this all like behind the scenes path. On top of like sort of rising up the ranks in stand up and getting to the point where I was like a regular at the Laugh Factory in Chicago and things like that. So then I moved to New York. My first job there is at Vice as a podcast producer, where I'm overworked, underpaid, miserable, don't have enough time to go out to open mics, barely paying, rent and that kind of thing. Right. And that's when I really started to get to a point where it's like, okay, I need to figure out what my ultimate goals are, get very specific about it, and make every next opportunity a stepping stone into that. And so one good thing that happened was that I got a manager through doing stand-up. So I had someone that I could talk to and bounce ideas on like how I can build this comedy career. And then I started to really focus on the fact that I just want to be a part of television. I want to be a part of just like making shows. It doesn't have to be something I'm making my own. I want to be staffed on shows and that kind of thing. And so certain things just started to collide. Like when I was back in Chicago, I started doing this podcast on my own as an experiment because I still had that little twinkle of wanting to be a This American Life producer. So I wanted to learn a lot about audio editing. And I love this podcast Radio Lab where there's all these like the sonic richness to everything. So I used to write for this like fledgling sort of like, it was basically like some comics wanted to make their own version of The Onion. So this was called the Whiskey Journal. And Kyle Scanlon, another great comedian who started that, he had at a party or something, he was like, hey, I got some podcast equipment that I'm not doing anything with. If you want it, you can just make whatever you want and we'll put it on the website. And so I came up with this idea of a podcast called It's All True, where I interview comedians and then I ask them to tell me a funny, personal, true story. And it's all casual. But as we're going through the story, I add in the sound effects. So I record this in my friend's basement. I'll be borrowing my friend's laptop. And I was just like trying to learn how to do this sort of Radio Lab thing. By the time I get that, the reason that I got that WBEZ internship was because Joe Dassault, the head of the podcast department there, when I interviewed with him, I talked to him about this podcast. He listened to it and he heard something in it. And that led to, when I got that internship, like him easing me into getting my podcast into the WBEZ podcast network, which was absolutely insane. So it would be on the same, you click on the podcast button at WBEZ.org, you would see This American Life, and you'd see some other podcasts, and then you would see my podcast. And I had access to their recording studios and things at WBEZ. And I had a WBEZ email. So whenever a comic was in town, I could reach out to them through this email, get them to come to WBEZ. And it was just weird. These weird dots started to connect. So I got to interview like Eddie Izzard and Wyatt Cenac and all these interesting people. So I'm in New York, miserable job advice, want to make everything a stepping stone. In Chicago, when Hari Kondabolu was in town, I reached out to him and I interviewed him. And that episode was great. We kind of stayed in touch on Twitter. And he noticed that I was in New York now. And he was co-hosting this podcast called Politically Reactive with W. Kamau Bell. And they were looking for a new podcast producer. He put my name in the running for that. And so that was great. So I went from overworked, underpaid podcast producer at Vice to producer of one podcast where the hosts are comedians, and W. Kamau Bell has a show at CNN. So I'm that much closer to like this ultimate thing that I want. The next opportunity was Wyatt Cenac was starting a show at HBO that ended up being called Problem Areas. I think the way this happened, it's likely that I think Hari, I don't know what happened. Maybe Hari recommended me as someone who could submit a packet for it. And maybe my manager did. I don't remember exactly. But it was actually one of the best packets I've ever written. And so it got me a meeting to an interview to potentially be a writer for that show. I was horrible at that interview, by the way. The first question is like, so tell me about yourself. And then you start at the very beginning of your life. That's before I learned that tell me about yourself is not as open-ended as you want it to be. Right. But they liked me enough where they only had, I think, like 6 slots for writers. They liked me enough where they gave me an invite to be a web producer. So it's not exactly what I wanted, but a good stepping stone. So I went from being a podcast producer to whatever web producer means for an HBO TV show. And
working your way.
Yeah, working my way, still doing stand-up all the time. I think at that time it's very surreal. I was co-hosting a monthly or bi-weekly stand-up show with Z-Way before Z-Way became Z-Way.
Got the prequel,
yeah. So then that it was an interesting. I was there for the first season of Problem Areas, and I think the best way to kind of describe it is that there was sort of a disconnect between this feeling of like, that I'm really here because I want to be a writer, right? I didn't apply to be a web producer, and these new ideas of like the web producer title was so vague that as the responsibilities started to pile on, and sometimes they were like, I want you to design a website. It was like, that I cannot. I thought this was just, Twitter and social media. And now it's like, So the next opportunity though also came from stand-up, this like weird combo thing. Yeah. So always doing shows, people reach out to, do a show. So I remember I did the show that was like, I think it was like a metal themed late night show and I was just doing stand-up on it. And this other comedian, Tim Duffy, was also doing stand-up on it. Yeah. And he worked at Comedy Central as in like the digital space at Comedy Central. So from us both being on this show, we both became mutuals on Twitter. And so he's seeing that I'm, so I try to post a lot on Twitter and be funny and all that. And he sees that I'm that I'm a web producer for this HBO show. And there was this one incident at Problem Areas where someone, I think in Slack, they put something about how the egg machine was broken. And so I was like, I bet I can turn this exact quote about the egg machine into a viral tweet, and no one believed me. So I went through this like sort of rampage of like DMing every person I knew on Twitter to retweet this random thing about an egg machine. And he was one of those people. So I feel like somehow that might be connected.
Yeah.
But when this opening came at Comedy Central Digital for a sort of they wanted a hybrid digital writer editor type person.
Right.
But I was a little frustrated about not being able to sever ties from the behind the scenes part of production and really get straight into writing. And so when this opportunity came and they wanted to see like sample work and that kind of stuff, I really sort of hammered in this idea that I'm just a writer and kind of made it seem like I don't know how to edit and I don't know how to do all this other stuff. And that gamble worked out so well that when I was hired and had a cubicle there, it was just like a Dell computer that didn't have any editing software. I couldn't edit if I wanted to. So all I could do was write. And so I wrote more than was necessary. It was just there to write like digital specific sketches for their YouTube and TikTok and Twitter, that kind of thing. And so
what you're telling me is to undersell yourself. That's what I'm
hearing. When necessary, at the right point, you know. Don't say you can do it all. I can do only one thing. That's what you really want, sort of. Once you know that sort of one thing that you want. So I feel like I was there for like a year and a half or maybe 2 years. And I ended up amassing this sort of like resume of documented work that I could point to this sketch released through Comedy Central. And I could say that I wrote that. And so when my manager heard that all that was looking for writers, she basically sent them, you know, my basic resume, but she could also send them links to these produced sketches with thousands of views that, you know, I was the essential, I was the writer of. And that got me an interview for all that. It was a phone interview. I was still in New York. I was in New York for all of this. I had gone through so many phases of like writing packets, getting interviews, not expecting anything to happen. But I kind of let myself like focus on how much I wanted it. And I sort of like gave myself a little moment to meditate on it. And it ended up being like this wonderful phone interview. And a couple of days later, they're like, yeah, we want you to come over. So, and so I, flew to Los Angeles, was living with my grandpa there while writing sketches on Nickelodeon for about 6 months. Okay, just want to take a breath, catch my breath a bit because I haven't even gotten to the Tonight Show.
I've done so much.
That's just one of those things. Like if you're not like steamrolling through it, like there's so many meandering points of the story. So, I was doing the long distance thing with my girlfriend, now my fiance, and so she was still in New York. I was in LA because I was pursuing this first like TV writing a job, this like, you know, mythical thing in my mind. I was finally doing it. But I really wanted to get back to New York. So I kept telling my manager, like, if any job opportunities come up in New York, I want to take it, that kind of thing. So so the Tonight Show was looking for writers. She got me connected into that conversation. And out of pure luck, you know, this interview with the Tonight Show goes well. So at some of the producers, I think they were kind of going back and forth they go to LA sometimes during the hiatus or something. So I met with them in LA, and then I had a FaceTime with Jimmy, and that was really fun. And so then at one point I was working at all that, but I knew I was going to, once all that season was done, I was going to go to New York to work on the Tonight Show. And right as that was happening, the pandemic hit. And so I remember we were writing at all that, and we were just in a room, like working on one sketch together. And every like 5 minutes, there'd be another text of this crazy update about like, and these rumors that New York is going to go on lockdown. They're not going to let anyone in and out. And I'm thinking multiple things. I'm thinking like, I have to go back to New York because my girlfriend's there. And now also I need to go to New York because like, I don't know what's going to happen with like my parents' mode of income. This Tonight Show job that I know I have is in New York. And if they're going in lockdown, I have to get there now because like I might be the breadwinner for who knows what happens when the world goes on lock. It was like, there's a lot going on. So I flew back that night, and luckily the Tonight Show kept their word for these new, writers that were hired before we officially started. And so then I wrote for The Tonight Show for a year and a half from my apartment, never set foot in 30 Rock, never met Jimmy Fallon in person, never met, 98% of my coworkers in person. It was a very surreal time. And on top of the surrealness of that, I think it must have been maybe 2 or 3 weeks in where during a hiatus, there was the police murder of George Floyd. And I think a couple of days before that murder, there was this uptick in these clips of Jimmy Fallon doing a sketch as Chris Rock on Saturday Night Live with his face truly looking like Chris Rock, let's say.
Yeah.
And so that I think, if I remember correctly, that all happened during a hiatus. And so when we got back on track, I logged onto the Zoom. I'm only a couple weeks into this job. All the late night hosts are at home. And now there's this focus. And I log onto the Zoom and I realized I am the only Black writer on this show. So so that was his own cosmos of it felt like the Twilight Zone. I'm in my apartment and yet I'm the only Black person. You've heard of being the only Black person in the room, but being the only Black person in the Zoom is totally different.
That's really isolating. Oh my
gosh. So that is the full story. And then, I wanted to get a balanced writing experience. And so when the head writers that I was working with at All That, Kevin and Heath, they were starting up a new sitcom at Nickelodeon called Warped. And I was really excited about it. It takes place in a comic book store. And so they were interested in me hopping on as a writer there. So I left The Tonight Show to start writing for that. And that didn't get picked up for a second season, but then Maurice on Mars was already in progress, partly through The Tonight Show and Warped. And so that finally came out. So it's been an interesting couple of years.
That's a whole journey. Because like I said before, I don't think people realize, for example, I can pop over to your website and be like, oh yeah, he started a Comedy Central. But that's just not how it works. Just the way that you went. You're like, no, listen, I was doing stand-up. Then I was open mic. I went to a radio station. I was a podcast producer. And that's the reality is that, especially as a creative, a lot of times you do kind of have to take jobs initially that may not be your end goal, but that can fuel and help you to meet the right people and also get some experience in that realm, in that world. And so, kudos to you for sticking it out.
Thank you. Yeah.
You said dark times. That might have been what it was related to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's one of those things where even the awful jobs, at least they fuel you. You're really motivated to get out of those, and everything is about just connections. I've really lucked out in terms of just these weird dots end up connecting, and I can only attribute that to being in these sort of cities where you have to go out and you have to bump into people. And so I've kind of lost a bit of that since the pandemic. I have to ease back into getting back into that sort of friction of everything, because that's really how things start to move, I feel. And the bulk of these things happen in Chicago and New York. And it's something that I don't think the equivalent would have happened if I stayed in LA with the same pursuit. It could have, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely, the pandemic, I think, just threw everybody for a loop. It will never be the same. People picked up all sorts of hobbies and crazy things. But I wanted to learn a little bit more about I guess if you could give us an inside look, so to speak, on what your experience has been being in the room, being a staff writer, pitching projects, all of that. What does that look like? And maybe some story that you can tell that is you're allowed to tell.
Yeah. So being in the room is there's a hierarchy to it, and it took me a while to get a sense of that, especially because I started in these sort of fringy sort of ways. So in the digital space, even at Comedy Central, there was a bit of a writer's room, but it's specifically for the internet. And so what I learned from that was like, the internet is all about getting people's attention as quickly as possible. So you really have to get to the gut of the comedy, like really fast. And also for Comedy Central's audience, I assume it's the same, that sort of South Parky, male-centric, it might be like 18 to 30 kind of there's a very specific type of comedy you need to write things for that. And so I was worried at first when I moved on to All That after that, because I was in that world for so long. It's like, oh, now writing for a kid's sketch show. I love the original All That. It's like a very formative part of my life. And what I learned from that is that it's almost more difficult and freeing, because a lot of adult comedy is referential, and it is kind of going for the low-hanging fruit. It's like, overly set, like a sex joke or whatever, or it's like a pop culture reference. For kids, you're not really trying to do pop culture references because you don't know if they know this pop culture reference. And everything becomes almost like more like classic comedy. It's almost more like Charlie Chaplin slapstick. Mm-hmm. It's funny, when someone falls down or slime falls on someone. It's like physical comedy. And so it's freeing in that way. And you have to pitch like purely comedy ideas. And I was like, becomes like, it can feel like you're writing I Love Lucy episodes almost, because it's just like, and then this happens, and there's a sort of like purity to that kind of comedy that's great. It's all, you figure out what your personality is in each room and where you're necessary. I have found that I am, this is like something I've called myself is I'm sort of the joke whisperer, in that I'm not a big act out kind of person. I can't, it's the same with the way my stand-up is. I can't like embody scenes. I'm not like a very like physically active kind of person in the room, but I kind of wait for the right moment to say the one thing that I know will make the dominoes fall for other ideas in the room. And then you ultimately get, it's a lot of saying like, what if this? And you say that at the right moment. And then, magic starts to happen. So, I think that answers your question. I can't think of like particular, scenarios that are particularly funny, but I also, you learn certain tricks like, sometimes it's easier to get a pitch across if you say a personal anecdote connected to it at first. So one of my one of the All That sketches that I did the original pitch of and kind of evolved in the room, etc. I started off by saying, when I was a kid, I always, I was like a nerdy kid, and I always loved nerdy characters on TV. And, I was always like saying, I love the characters on TV, and I was always saying, like, according to my calculations. So I think it'd be funny if there's like a character who's like always saying according to my calculations, but the calculations are always wrong. Like that sort of trope of like Billy from the Power Rangers or whatever, of like, there's always like the calculations guy, that kind of thing. And so that like evolved into this whole thing that became a sketch on the show.
I know you have only a little bit more time. Real quick. Because I was listening to the God Pod, trying to learn a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And which hilarious, by the way. Shout out to them. Go check it out. But you talk about having like this really large family. Like you're the oldest of, was it eight?
Oh no. Yeah. I have a small nuclear family. I have one younger sister. She's 3 years younger than my dad is the second youngest of 8. And so,
okay.
And they're a very close-knit family. And then my mom has like a sort of large blended family situation going on. So constantly so many voices and so many, and, people who are way funnier than me, kind of what I was saying about in the writer's room, where like, I'm used to big personalities kind of, rightfully like taking over the space, like cousins who are rappers and that kind of thing. Yeah. And that's just not who I am. I'm a low frequency guy who can just say the right thing at the right moment to get the laugh. I cannot.
I think you guys are similar in that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
As personally, stealing a quote from one of my new favorite comedians, personally, as a black man, yeah, growing up with pimps, hustlers, and every time I would just get smaller and smaller, and then I would find a way to be an asteroid in certain situations. So I can feel that. Yeah, just popping in and just all right, that's enough.
Yeah, and then. Yeah. And I didn't know how to, I think also it's partially because I was kind of sheltered too. Like I wasn't allowed to interact with the world so much that, and that gives me that sort of comedic distance from everything, right? Trying to see the big picture. I'm trying to connect the dots. And when you're just sort of a quiet person, you notice a lot of funny things. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's where you really get to be observant, because that's what me and my husband talk about all the time, how we're both just like flies on the walls a lot of times. So we're seeing everybody's shit and like what they're getting to.
Yeah, I'm just the guy eating food at the party and scanning. I am R2D2 basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's where you get like the best material, it seems like. Oh. And I kind of want to know, again, I know you have to go, so I'm just gonna, but I kind of want to know what like your influences were as like what comedic influences, or maybe even not, because I know obviously Star Wars was just any like TV shows or comedians or whatever, just that kind of influence you as a storyteller and writer, comedian.
I will say all of this with the caveat of understanding that so many creative geniuses in the world are horrible people. And I find like question of like who your favorite comedian is to be so complicated now. If like you say Bill Cosby or fun fact, I was at one point in my life, I was possibly going to be on Kids Say the Darndest Things. And I actually have a picture from me in elementary school with Bill Cosby. All I remember is that he smelled like cigars. I don't know why I didn't make the cut. It's like they came, like his producers came, I guess they like went to schools and stuff, and I passed some sort of test at my school. And then I remember going to a studio and just being, I remember it kind of feeling like that scene in The Matrix where Neo is waiting to meet the Oracle and he bends the spoon. I just remember being in a room like that with these other funny kids. And for some reason I didn't make the cut. And now in hindsight, thank goodness I don't have video footage of me just like making Bill Cosby chuckle. But so influences, definitely Star Wars in general. The Matrix that I just mentioned, one of my favorite movies. Like generally 90s Nickelodeon, such a huge impact on my life. And it's not even specific to shows. It's just more of like the energy of the brand of Nickelodeon in the 90s is such a major
splattery in your face, slimy. Just
and sort of feels like subversive somehow, like Kablam and Hey Arnold's one of my favorite cartoons.
Oh yeah.
So that's which like listen to the soundtrack to Hey Arnold if you haven't in a while. So good. Like Jim Lang, even like the credits, the end credits music is actually better than the opening credits. Yeah.
Here we go.
Comedically, so someone on that list of like, unfortunately, Woody Allen's stand-up was an influence on me. I don't know if I should say unfortunately or not, but his stand-up alone is felt like a sort of discovery to me. Richard Pryor, who's also wasn't the greatest person in the world, but because he was so honest, is like he gets the pass for like being brutally honest about it. Did some pretty bad stuff. I got into Richard Pryor not just from like everyone, all my dad and all his family like loving him. The real reason I started to focus on Richard Pryor was because when I first had that little click in my head of like I want to do stand up, he was specifically a stand-up comedian who looked the most like me. And so I would look at footage of him on stage because it was like visually the closest thing to me seeing myself on stage and being like, okay, if he does this thing with his face, that's kind of funny. Or like, and not that I'm not as much of a physical comedian as him, but I learned a bit about him. Specifically, there's this one, I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but I remember watching this video over and over again. It was Richard Pryor at the Comedy Store. And it's Richard Pryor standing still the whole time. And that, because you're so used to seeing him pace the stage and all that, but just like watching him stand still and tell jokes in this very calm tone was a big influence on me. Stephen Wright, Ron Funches was a comedian that felt like a discovery to me, especially in that like I discovered him in that dark period of my life where I was like back home with my parents, working at a movie theater, turning on Conan on TBS whenever it came on, because Conan might be the last late night host who had stand-up sets that mattered. They kind of feel like they don't matter as much when a stand-up shows up to do stand-up on a late night show. There was some element of like weight when a comic performed on Conan's show. And so when Ron Funches, this big black man, comes up doing this insanely absurd stand-up about like pigeons or whatever, and then he ends his set with like tossing Skittles in the air, and still in the throes of like this, the glow of this Obama era, I was like, oh, it's possible to be a different kind of black comedian. Like the things that I have going on in my head are not don't seem so crazy. Like I don't have to fit into the Kings of Comedy mold. I don't have to fit into the Richard Pryor mold. I have to fit into the Chris Rock mold. This sort of like absurd alt black comedy can thrive. And so that truly, like, he is one of my favorite comedians just for like sort of opening that mental door for me at the time. Those are kind of the big ones. There are others, but I'm horrible at answering that question because I put all those caveats in there. I know.
No, I know. People. I mean, what can you do? Also, I get that. That is a hard question. Anytime you're asked the question, what's your favorite of anything? It's like, for me personally, my mind is just like, either it goes blank or it's just like everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I relate to that.
Because I feel like that's an extroverted skill to just be like, oh, I like cheeseburgers. I like only Richard Pryor and I only like this. But you ask Tim Barnes or any one of us that question, it's just like, well, how do you describe favorite?
Yeah. It's like trying to describe the universe. Yeah.
Exactly. And it all starts with Star Wars.
Yes, of course.
All starts with Star Wars. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Tim, for coming and talking with me today. I feel like I could probably talk to you for a whole nother hour. So no, we got things to do. But I just wanted, if you could leave us with a quick, if there's anyone else listening or what you might have said to Tiny Tim, it's a little like, what would that advice be for anyone that's, wanting to kind of be in a writer or, in the TV world?
I think the best piece of advice for people wanting to enter these creative spaces is to not get caught up in comparison. And it's so easy to get caught up in like competition. And in some ways those things are helpful, but they can easily get you to a negative space. And just make little tiny steps to track your progress. I think what I was saying earlier about just make sure that you acknowledge the stepping stones for what they are. Like it might not be that end goal that you wanted to get to, but looking at my career in hindsight, some of these moments where I was like super, super frustrated. When I look back on that, like I learned so much from those frustrating scenarios. But that idea of me talking to Tiny Tim, that's usually my compass, is like being able to track the things that I'm doing that would have blown my mind when I was a kid, being conscious of like the things that brought me joy when I was a kid. I think that is possibly the best advice, is just to follow that compass of your younger self before all of the world started to
Yeah.
make things complicated, because that little version of yourself is in there, and it helps me out a lot too when things are overwhelming, or if I feel like I'm not valuing certain things that were definitely wonderful achievements. It's just like this, like remind yourself of how awesome your younger self would have felt, just to, not you might not have done a comedy set on Conan, but the fact that you're even on stage. Remember when you used to cry when you had to perform on stage, so
Now you're just, a little anxious. You're just having a panic attack. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I think that's the best advice you can give, is like tap into that inner child and what they loved, and that compass, and you'll always be going the right direction with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you on the interwebs or connect with you if they want to see your stand-up comedy or Maurice on Mars, all that?
Yeah. You can find everything at timbarnescomedy.com, including a link to my Substack newsletter called Letters from African America, where I'm sending monthly updates, and trying to ease out of like the sort of like the Twitter world where everything feels like a little text soundbite, and trying to get back into writing full paragraphs and short stories and things like that.
Okay.
So this has been so much fun. Thank you for having me on. This is a great conversation.
Absolutely. It was
I would love to do this again too.
Yeah. If you ever want to bring me back.
I feel like we've only got a little bit of the Tim Barnes cinematic universe. We got the first movie. We need the rest of the. No, I truly feel like I would love to hear more. I was more. I felt like I should be a sponge and just soak it in as like a normal person would, and try to capture as much of it as I could, so I can, one for me, take it in for me, and another, take it in for other people to see if there were questions that anybody else would want to know, even if they didn't know that they would want to know. You know what I mean? But he had a, oh man, that is a good example, in my opinion, of somebody using everything to affect everything
right.
in their world. No stone left unturned. Even a job at Dunkin' Donuts could mean something, right? If it's along the path that you need that you want to follow, to always keep that dream in front of you, and
Yeah.
all the influences of the dream, and the child, like holding hands with your child the entire time, your inner child. And I mean, look where he is,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. I think you're right. Like everything affects everything everywhere all at once. Now I feel like I'm going to keep saying that for the rest of my life, because it's so true. Like he needed to work that job and have those dark moments. And really, in order for him to then
Yeah.
the radio station and be able to bump into the right people who it just seems like one opportunity after another. But it's also a lesson in like being humble, like, and kind of doing whatever, not whatever it takes, but doing what it takes to kind of get to that place.
Doing what you think it takes, because at the end of the day,
Right.
I mean, that's all you really got.
Right. Well, because that's true. Because he was, he's just doing open mic night, and then he was like, you know what, maybe I could do a little bit more with this. And he's kind of like dipped his toes into all of the different realms. And so now, as a writer, I'm sure that makes him an even better writer, because not only does he have that foundation of just like the comedy, but he also has worked as a producer where you have to pitch ideas and you have to also do, outlines and writing in that world too. So I think it's really cool to see that all come to fruition.
Also, I felt like he could help me with my Star Wars journey,
Yeah, yeah.
because I was serious. I've always been, because I know Star Wars has something special, right? But I haven't really been into Star Wars, but it's affected so many people on such a deep level. And I know, at least when I watch the old ones, I'm not like really enjoying it in the old fashioned sense, but I'm enjoying what it took to make it during that time. And I'm like, wow, that's an impressive feat. Now I'm the controversial guy. I like the later movies. I like all of them, like the prequels and stuff like that, because that's where I landed in my universe. That's where I started my journey. But uh, with Tim, I feel like an introvert's ears should wiggle when you listen to Tim,
Yeah.
because that is learning how to navigate a world full of big personalities when you go outside as a certain person that stays inside your mind. You
Mm,
know, what opportunities do you take? How to not, because it can be easy to get caught up in a vacuum of the extroverted world. And I'm talking like, like we all got a piece of the extrovert in us, but
yeah.
for those mainly introverted people, I connected with him on that, um expressing yourself, staying yourself, because man, I felt it before. It's easy to get caught up into like the head nodding and like uh just going along with the person that's being like that's like a lion in a room.
Right. You
And
just
you're
kind of let
yeah,
them have the buck and you just stay back in the back.
yeah, but yeah, learning to take on things and learning to not be so great all the time in a weird way. You don't
Mm,
have to say everything you don't have to say everything that you do. You especially if you want to do a certain thing, right? And that could be enough. That could be enough.
yeah. No, I agree with that. I think you just kind of you it's about finding your voice amongst all of that.
Yeah.
Because that was the biggest thing for me growing up in a household where I just really didn't talk. And we didn't like chillax like that. So, my we've talked about it before. My room was literally like my safe haven. I'd be reading and writing and
Yeah, I mean, yeah, being a,
yeah,
a kid in the 90s, we were all kind of raised by Nickelodeon, you
that's
know?
true. Girl. We really were freaking Keenan and Kel. Those were our parents. Like those were the rents right there.
Yeah. This is all of that. That's when he got to a point where it's like, this is all of that. This is all of it.
Yeah, this is all that. I also think that's interesting that he almost what was it? Is that the kids? All the how do you say it? The darndest things that kids say.
Kids say the darndest things.
I used to love that show so
Yeah.
much. So me hungry. My bad.
There's
For
a reason I
this,
typed it.
I know there's a reason why you
I'm
typed
trying to
it.
stay professional.
I get it, and I appreciate your professionalism. But this is the casual corner, so it's fine.
Yeah,
I
and all the places he said he worked at kind of made me hungry.
yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Creatives, we always, and before we make it, it's like we always end up working in these places that have like the
That
food.
are inside.
Like
The inside with food places.
uh, Walmart attached to a McDonald's. Got the stuff.
Dunkin' attached to donuts.
Uh,
Uh yeah.
I'm kind of glad I never worked
But
in fast food though. I don't
oh,
think that people could have handled my hair. My hair would have just been everywhere.
it's too fast.
Yeah,
It's
that's
too
true.
fast. That's some extrovert stuff. It's wait, we need like Panera Bread or
Right, right.
Starbucks,
Something more like,
Cold Stone.
oh,
There's a there's a certain art in the preparation at Cold Stone.
yeah, you and your cold. I forgot about
Whip
your
it.
your stint at the Cold Stone before you
I
had.
will never stop talking about it, apparently.
The way you talk about it is like it was the best job you ever had. Was
I literally I was in the Air Force shooting guns, and I still love Cold Stone more than I love the Air Force.
you like the song that we gotta sing? It was just bringing joy to people's days with their ice cream.
I might go work there again. Who knows?
Shoot, why not? That's a nice little gig, nice little side gig.
Yeah,
You know, it's
I
fun.
can get those tips, I think.
Oh yeah, you can wait. I didn't. I definitely can see you getting tips. Just like
Yeah.
looking around. You know, you're an introverted extrovert. I feel like though you have that like way with people and way with
I
words.
just yeah. Once I find a way to tune into a person, I think I don't know. Which means for this podcast, I would love to talk to Tim some more about his the nitty-gritty of stand up and
Really.
his writing process and all that. Because I feel like now we've gotten like a general sense of his universe, I guess you could say. Because that's the only word I can use to encapsulate the experience that I experienced through him.
Right.
Is to call it a universe because it's like you ever
This
seen that movie Crash?
right.
Where
Yeah.
worlds collide. That's what it's like. It's just like here. I'm here, I'm here, and boom. Now I'm here.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, whoa, lots of questions now. And we
Yeah.
were strapped for time, but I feel like we needed 6 hours for
Oh, for real. We could have
for
a
that.
whole audio book with
Like we need to fly to him to.
go hit up. You know what? I have been wanting to go to like just visit New York.
Oh,
One of
I would love to do that too. I mean, now is a better time than ever.
is it? You know, the rent's getting crazy out there. Although I guess we just be
We said visit.
that's true. You're like, I'm not trying to stay there forever. But I do think it would be interesting because just with like your journey or your refound journey with comedy and open mics and all that stuff, you're right. It would have been interesting to like learn a little bit more about like his process and
Yeah.
kind of like what he does.
But that at the end of the day, that was really interesting and it was fun.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Thanks again, guys, for stopping by and listening to the show today. Please rate, review, subscribe, and feel free to share with a friend. We love having our community of storytellers and creatives grow and blossom. Until next time.